I wasn't invited to my brother's baby shower. They booked a rooftop, custom onesies, and I paid for all of it. My name is Maisie Williams. I'm 34. No, not the actress, just someone who shares her name and happens to work behind the scenes in film finance. For the past 10 years, I've been based in Chicago, crunching numbers for streaming productions and indie budgets while supporting nearly every member of my family along the way. If you're imagining someone who quietly makes six figures and never brings drama to Thanksgiving, that's me. Or rather, that was me. Until I found out just how invisible I could become to the people I sacrificed everything for. I grew up in Springfield, Illinois, the eldest of three. Our dad left when I was 10, leaving mom to raise us on a receptionist salary. I got my first job at 14. Paid for my own community college tuition, transferred to NYU on scholarship, and after 10 years in LA and New York, I came back to the Midwest. Bought mom a car, cleared her credit card debt, gave my little brother Jonah the down payment on his first condo. It never felt like a burden. It felt like what family did. Jonah is 3 years younger than me, charming in a boyish, careless way. He used to sing in a college band that never made it past campus bars, but he always had a way of making people adore him, especially mom. To her, Jonah was sensitive, creative, just a late bloomer. And when he dropped out of community college and floated from gig to gig, I was the one who helped him land on his feet. I helped him build a YouTube tech channel when he had nothing but an iPhone and a ring light. I helped negotiate his first brand deal. And when the algorithm finally smiled on him, I clapped the loudest. Then came Ivy. She was a content creator too, with dreamy shots of iced coffee, minimalist nurseries, and inspirational quotes that always seemed vaguely judgmental. They met on a collab shoot and married within 8 months. I paid for the rehearsal dinner, and part of the videographer, because Jonah said their sponsor backed out. It wasn't a huge deal to me, just another way to show I cared. I didn't realize that was the moment my place in their lives shifted from sister to silent benefactor. The first red flag was subtle. Jonah and Ivy started referring to me as so type A in front of others, always with a laugh always followed by, "But she means well." Then came the missed invitations to their housewarming their dog's birthday, Ivy's first product launch brunch. Each time I asked about it, Jonah said, "Oh, you wouldn't have liked it, lots of influencers and baby talk." It stung, but I told myself I was being too sensitive. Until that Tuesday night when I sat down to do my monthly expenses and saw a $3,800 charge to Velvet House events. I stared at the number. It didn't make sense. I hadn't booked anything with them. My stomach tightened as I checked the full list of charges. Catering, custom embroidery, rooftop venue, floral design. It totaled over $8,000. I checked the last 4 digits. It was the emergency card I'd given mom last year when she slipped on ice and needed ER coverage. I had said clearly, "This card is for medical emergencies only, not groceries, not bills. Emergencies." As the reality hit me, I opened Instagram, and there it was. Ivy had posted a carousel just that morning. Jonah cradling her belly on a rooftop deck strung with fairy lights. Blue and white balloon arches framing a grazing table of imported cheeses and gold-dusted cupcakes. Custom onesies hanging from satin ribbons, all tagged with boutique designers and local vendors I now recognized from my statement. I scrolled faster. My name was nowhere. No mention, no tag, not even a thanks to. But nestled in the comments was a chilling detail. Ivy's sister had written, "Thank you, Maisie, for sponsoring this dream day. You're the best auntie ever." I wasn't invited. I wasn't told. But I was the one who paid for everything. And what happened after I confronted them, that was the part that changed everything. I stared at the glowing screen, my fingers frozen above the keyboard. My first instinct was disbelief, the kind that makes you question your memory before you question your family. Had I agreed to this? Was there a conversation I'd forgotten? But I checked every message thread with Mom Jonah Ivy. Nothing. Not a single request, not even a heads up. Just a quiet, calculated use of the card I'd handed over in trust. I could almost hear Mom's voice justifying it already. It's family. It was for a good cause. But what stopped me cold wasn't just the money. It was the silence, the exclusion. They'd planned an entire event around a milestone I was supposed to care about, and never once thought to include me. Not even in the most performative way. I picked up my phone and called Mom. She answered cheerfully, clearly unaware of the emotional earthquake already in motion. Maisie, I was just about to text you. The florist you love is having a sale on hydrangeas. Should I get some for the front yard? My response came out flat. Mom, we need to talk about the baby shower. Silence. A beat too long. Then, casual like we were discussing groceries. Oh. That. It was beautiful, wasn't it? Ivy's sister did such a great job. The photos turned out so well. I clenched my jaw. You used my emergency card. That's over $8,000 in charges I didn't approve. Another pause. Well, we figured you wouldn't mind. It's your brother, your nephew. And let's be honest, Maisie, you're doing really well. We weren't asking you to buy a house. I felt a sting behind my eyes but kept my tone steady. That card was for emergencies, for health issues. You knew that. Mom exhaled, her voice growing sharper. You always make everything about rules, about boundaries. Not everything in life is a spreadsheet. Maybe if you were more involved with the family, you wouldn't feel so left out. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. But the truth was, I wasn't angry because they threw a party. I was angry because they built it using the one thing they never offered me: consideration. Later that night, I got a message from Ivy. Not a thank you. Not an apology. A tag. She'd posted a new reel, a slow pan of the rooftop, with the caption, "Dream Day, Dream Team." All made possible by our silent MVP. Number family first. Number sponsored by sister. Comments flooded in from her followers, praising her style, gushing over the aesthetic. One said, "Your sister must be amazing. Can she sponsor my wedding too?" Another joked, "Maisie better be in the will after this." I didn't respond. I didn't even react, because something inside me had shifted. For years, I'd been the fallback plan, the fixer, the one who quietly solved problems without demanding recognition, and I had been okay with that. Until now. The next day, I went into work at my small production finance firm downtown. I tried to concentrate, buried myself in budgets and line items, but the humiliation kept resurfacing like a bad aftertaste. My coworker Amanda passed by my desk and paused. "Hey, are you okay? You look like you haven't slept." I hesitated, then shrugged. "Just family stuff." She gave me a knowing look, the worst kind. We laughed quietly, but it felt hollow, because while work could give me structure, it couldn't protect me from what I knew was coming next. Sure enough, Jonah called me that evening. No greeting, no acknowledgement. Just, "Mom said you're being weird about the shower." "What's going on?" I didn't sugarcoat it. "You used my credit card for your party and didn't invite me. That's fraud, Jonah." His response was instant. "Oh, come on. Fraud, seriously. We thought you'd be fine with it. Ivy said you'd probably hate baby stuff anyway." "That's not the point," I said slowly. "You didn't ask. You didn't tell me. You didn't even include me. You just helped yourselves and expected I'd be okay with it." His voice turned defensive. "You're always acting like we owe you something. Just because you have a better job doesn't mean you get to hold it over us. You chose to help. That's on you." I stared at the phone in disbelief. There it was. The truth stripped of all pretense. Not only did they not see what they did as wrong, they saw me as the problem. As the barrier to their version of family harmony. The person who should give without question, support without being seen, and accept invisibility as her reward. It was in that moment I realized something that made my stomach turn. I wasn't family to them. I was funding. I didn't block Jonah. I didn't yell or curse or threaten legal action, though every fiber in me said I should have. Instead, I hung up and sat alone in my apartment, the city glowing outside my window like nothing had happened. But something had. And it wasn't just the financial betrayal, it was the realization that I had spent years investing in people who saw me as an option, not a person. I had become a safety net they resented for existing. Useful but ultimately disposable. The next morning I did what I always do when overwhelmed. I made a list. At the top, I wrote what I can control. Underneath it, I listed 3 things. 1. Cancel the emergency credit card. 2. Document the unauthorized charges. 3. Stop playing the quiet hero. I contacted my bank and filed a fraud inquiry. The woman on the line was kind, but her questions made the situation feel even more surreal. Were the charges made by a stranger or someone you know? I hesitated before answering. Family, I said quietly, but without permission. She nodded as if she'd heard this before, and walked me through the paperwork. She mentioned the word theft more than once. I didn't correct her. Later that afternoon, Mom called. Not to apologize, but to smooth things over. She spoke in that upbeat tone people use when pretending a wound doesn't exist. Maisie, honey, don't be dramatic. We're family. Ivy is hormonal, and Jonah didn't think you'd even care about a baby party. You've always been more practical. There was a long silence on my end. Then I asked, "Did you know they were planning not to invite me?" She sighed. Maisie, I thought it was best. You've been so distant lately, so focused on work. You're not exactly maternal. That word hit harder than I expected, as if having a career meant I had forfeited any right to be part of a family moment. I replied calmly, and that justifies using my money without asking. She didn't answer directly. Just said, I knew you wouldn't want your baby nephew to go without. Then she added as if it were obvious. You've always had more than you needed. I didn't argue. There was no point. People like her don't understand boundaries. They only understand access, and I had made myself endlessly accessible for too long. That night, I took a long walk down to the lake. No phone, no distractions. Just the wind, the water, and the cold truth I hadn't wanted to face. I had enabled this, not just with money, but with silence. Every time I said yes out of guilt. Every time I let something slide to avoid tension. Every time I believed that being generous meant being small. The next few days were quiet, but not peaceful. Ivy went on posting baby bump content as if nothing had happened. Jonah didn't call. Mom sent a few passive-aggressive texts, like I hope you're feeling better, darling. Stress isn't good for the soul. But the pressure didn't come from them. It came from within. A quiet internal war between the version of me who wanted to cut them off completely and the version who still believed in repairing what was broken. I decided to confide in someone who wasn't involved. Her name was Dana, a colleague from work I respected. We'd never been close, but she once shared a story about lending money to her sister and being ghosted for 2 years. Over coffee, I told her everything: the charges, the fake thank you posts. The way my family acted like my success made me less human. She didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, she said something I never forgot. You're not wrong for helping, but you're not obligated to keep bleeding just because they never learned to stand up. That night I sat with her words and opened a blank document. I titled it, If I Had a Voice. Then I wrote everything I wanted to say but couldn't, to Jonah, to Ivy, to my mom. Not for revenge, for clarity. Because sometimes the most powerful step in reclaiming your dignity is simply hearing yourself tell the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to explain my anger away. It was justified. It was clean. It was mine. The next few weeks passed like fog. Not heavy, not dramatic, just gray. I went to work, answered emails, balanced budgets, smiled in meetings. Nobody could tell I was unraveling quietly from the inside out. But the thing about betrayal is it doesn't show up like a wound. It's not loud. It's quiet. It lingers in small ways. In the way you hesitate before checking your phone. In the way you start to wonder if maybe you overreacted. That maybe they were right. That maybe you are too cold, too detached, too career-driven to be the kind of sister people want in their lives. Those thoughts crept in late at night. But I fought them. Every time I remembered the charges, the Instagram caption, the fake gratitude. I remembered that forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. And it sure as hell isn't pretending nothing happened. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. I got an email from a woman named Lila, someone I didn't recognize at first. She said she was a friend of Ivy's and had worked in the influencer marketing space with her for a few years. The subject line just said, "You need to see this." I opened the attachment and stared. Screenshots. Group chats. A message Ivy had sent weeks before the shower. Maisie won't be invited. Too stiff, too finance girl energy, but will still use her emergency card. Her mom has it. I'll just make sure she's mentioned in the thank you notes so no one asks questions. I sat motionless, letting the words sink in like wet cement. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a miscommunication. It was premeditated. Ivy had planned the exclusion, planned the theft, and worst of all, expected my silence. I didn't know Lila's motive. Maybe guilt, maybe revenge, maybe both. But her final message said I used to admire Ivy. But this crossed a line. People like you shouldn't be stepped on just because you don't post about every little thing you do. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how invisible I had become, not just in their eyes but in my own. I had accepted being minimized because I thought strength meant endurance. But maybe strength also meant confrontation. That weekend, I wrote a formal demand letter. Nothing emotional, just facts. The charges, the unauthorized, used the violation of trust. I gave them 10 business days to respond before I escalated it to legal channels. I sent it to Jonah and copied Ivy. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Jonah again. This time angry. "What the hell, Maisie? A letter? Are you serious? You couldn't just call." I kept my voice even. "You didn't ask when you used my money. You didn't call when you excluded me." "So no, this isn't a phone conversation," he scoffed. "You really think this is worth burning the family over?" I answered simply. "I'm not burning anything. I'm just done funding the matchsticks." The next day, Ivy posted a story, a photo of her cradling her bump with a caption that read, "Some people care more about money than family. So sad what stress does to people." It was vague enough to seem harmless, sharp enough to feel like a blade. Comments rolled in, all supportive. "Ignore the haters. Protect your peace, mama. Your baby deserves positivity." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't about public image anymore. This was about something far deeper. For the first time in years, I was choosing self-respect over silence. But what happened next truly confirmed everything I feared. My mom showed up at my apartment unannounced, something she hadn't done in years. She looked tired, more fragile than I remembered. I let her in. She sat down without a word, pulled out an envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a check for $8,000, but when I looked at her face, I saw no regret, only weariness. She said softly, "You got what you wanted. Can this be over now?" I held the check, but what I really felt was the weight of everything she didn't say. No apology, no accountability. Just exhaustion and an expectation to let things go. I placed the check on the table. "This isn't about the money anymore," I said quietly. She didn't reply, just stood up and said, "You've changed." I nodded. "Yes, I have. And I'm not sorry for it." When the door closed behind her, I felt the kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it. I didn't reply to Ivy's Instagram caption. I didn't clap back or write a lengthy defense. Instead, I closed the app, turned off my phone, and stared at my ceiling for 2 straight hours. Not crying, not panicking, just quiet. The kind of quiet you feel when something fundamental clicks into place. They had stolen from me, lied about me, and when I stood up for myself, they painted me as cold, unforgiving, excessive. But I knew the truth now. I wasn't the problem. I had simply stopped playing the part they assigned me. That Monday, I walked into my office at Lakeview Capital and scheduled a lunch with Marcus, the only person at work who had once hinted he understood family betrayal. We sat in a cafe 2 blocks from the office, and when he asked how I'd been, I told him everything. Not the sanitized version, the real one. how they used my emergency card, how they cut me out of the shower and then tagged me like a sponsor, how they turned silent theft into a family tradition. He didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, he said, "I've been there. Different details. Same script. You give until they expect it. Then they resent you for not giving more." That line stuck with me, because it wasn't anger I felt anymore. It was realization. I had become so focused on being helpful that I didn't see how predictable my role had become. The responsible one. The reliable one. The one they could disrespect privately but praise publicly when convenient. And I let them. Every time I gave in. Every time I explained myself. Every time I put peace above principle. That night I made 3 calls. First to the credit card company to confirm that all charges had been frozen and a fraud investigation was underway. Second to a family attorney I'd worked with on a prior estate case. And third to a therapist named Dr. Andrea Cole, whose profile said she specialized in financial abuse and boundary trauma. I didn't make those calls because I was falling apart. I made them because I was finally done patching cracks in a wall that was never mine to maintain. My first session with Dr. Cole was quiet. She asked me what I hoped to gain from therapy. I told her I wanted to learn how to stop apologizing for not being exploited. She smiled and said, "That's not weakness, that's grief. You're grieving the version of family you hoped they could be." I didn't cry, but I did feel something heavy release from the center of my chest. For the first time, someone had put words to the quiet pain I carried every time I gave more than I received, and told myself it was love. A week later, I received a text from Jonah. It wasn't an apology, just a line that read, "We'll get you the money eventually, but you don't have to act like a martyr." I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to my lawyer and added it to the growing file. Ivy, on the other hand, took a different route. She posted another story. This time, a photo of the nursery with a caption that said, "Built with love, not loans." Unlike some people, we create our own blessings. The comments were filled with heart emojis and inside jokes I wasn't meant to understand. It was petty, transparent, and beneath me. But it confirmed something I had already begun to believe: people who feel exposed will always try to humiliate the person who stopped covering for them. So I stayed silent. I didn't chase validation. I didn't try to win back the crowd. I simply started living like someone who no longer feared being disliked by the wrong people. I threw myself into a new project at work, helping first-time creators structure contracts with major brands. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my own family resented my boundaries, strangers now paid me to teach them how to build theirs. One afternoon, while finalizing a licensing deal for a client, my phone buzzed. It was my cousin Jenna. She wrote, "I don't know what Ivy told everyone, but I know you. You're the only reason Jonah ever got a career. Just wanted you to know I see it." I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I needed the validation, but because it reminded me that the truth always leaks through, even in families trained to bury it. That evening, I took the check my mother had left on my table, sealed it in an envelope and mailed it back. No note, no instructions, just silence. Because I finally understood that closure doesn't come from others doing right by you. It comes from you refusing to be wronged again. There was no announcement. No dramatic statement, just distance. I stopped answering calls. I muted the family group chat. I didn't block anyone, but I didn't engage either. It was a quiet kind of boundary, one that didn't require explanation. The kind that people like Ivy find infuriating because it takes away their favorite weapon: your reaction. By week 3, the silence started to sting them. I could tell from the new wave of social media subtweets, this time from Jonah. One story read, "Not everyone who's silent is innocent. Some just hate being called out." Another, "When the money stops, the mask falls." I read them once, took a screenshot for my legal file, and moved on. If they needed to build a villain out of me to feel better about themselves, I wasn't going to interfere with the script. Let them play it out. My energy was somewhere else now. At work, I was leading the final phase of a partnership with a women-led startup focused on digital rights. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trying to prove anything. I wasn't trying to impress or fix or win favor. I was just good at what I did. That alone was enough. One afternoon, while reviewing a clause about usage royalties, I got an email from a former colleague who now worked at a media platform. She invited me to speak on a panel about financial agency in creative industries. The topic: When Boundaries Become Your Biggest Asset. I stared at the subject line for a long time before accepting. Not because I needed the spotlight, but because the timing felt poetic. After everything that happened, I was finally being asked to talk not about success but about control, about how financial power means nothing if you let guilt drain it. The panel was held at a co-working loft downtown. Small crowd, maybe 50 people. But when I finished speaking, a woman in the back raised her hand and asked, "What would you say to someone who feels like every time they say no they lose love?" I paused, then answered honestly, "If saying yes is the only way they love you, it's not love, it's leverage, and that's not yours to carry." That night I walked home with a strange lightness I hadn't felt in months. Not joy, not victory, just clarity. And clarity is more powerful than closure. But life, of course, doesn't reward peace with silence. A few days later, a distant cousin named Ella texted me, "Hey, I don't want to stir things up, but Ivy's sister just shared a TikTok that's clearly about you." I didn't even click the link, Ella continued. "She's saying you're using lawyers to ruin Jonah's credit, that you're withholding money from your future nephew, and that you've always had a superiority complex." I closed my phone and sat still. Not out of hurt. Out of calculation. Because I knew what this meant. The chargebacks from the credit card company had gone through. Ivy and Jonah were now responsible for paying the vendors out of pocket, and the fallout had begun. A few vendors had likely contacted them for unpaid invoices, maybe even threatened collections. And instead of facing that reality, they chose to redirect attention to the woman who had simply said no. That's when I realized they never expected consequences. They thought guilt would keep me quiet forever, but I had rewritten that script the moment I stopped explaining myself. Later that week, I received a voicemail from my father. I hadn't heard from him in months. His voice was flat, maybe even a little ashamed. "Maisie, I know things have gotten complicated, but I hope you'll think about what's really important. This is family. Jonah made mistakes, yes, but don't let money drive a wedge forever." I didn't call back. Because the wedge wasn't made of money, it was made of disrespect. And no apology that skips accountability is worth returning a call for. Instead, I wrote a new set of rules for myself, not out of spite, out of structure. I wouldn't attend family events without a clear spoken invitation. I wouldn't entertain financial discussions without paperwork. I wouldn't say yes just because saying no made others uncomfortable. And for the first time, I didn't feel cold. I felt warm, grounded. Like I was finally living on terms I'd spent a decade, too afraid to name. I used to think that closure required confrontation. That one day I would sit across from Jonah or Ivy or maybe even both of my parents and tell them everything I had rehearsed in my head for years. That they would listen, finally understand the weight of what they had done, and maybe even apologize, and then we'd have some quiet movie-ending resolution. But real life doesn't give you that kind of scene. Closure in real life doesn't usually come from a conversation. It comes from distance, from no longer needing to explain yourself. 3 weeks after the panel in Chicago, I was invited to consult on a documentary project in Vancouver. They were producing a segment focused on financial literacy for freelancers and young creatives, and the director wanted someone to help make the numbers make sense without making people feel stupid. The moment I read the email, something settled inside me. They had no idea about my story, but they had unknowingly handed me the exact thing I needed, a chance to turn all of it into something useful. Not revenge, not a redemption arc, just something that mattered. Before leaving, I checked my inbox one last time. There it was, an email from Ivy. Subject line: "You win." No greeting, no context. Just one sentence in the body. I hope your integrity keeps you warm at night. I didn't respond. I didn't even feel anything. Because I wasn't in her game anymore. She thought silence meant weakness, that not retaliating was a kind of retreat. But for me, silence had finally become a boundary, not a void. I packed my things, locked my apartment, and got on the plane without a single drop of guilt. Vancouver was cold, but the kind of cold I liked. Clear air, clean sidewalks, no one who knew my name. For the first time in years, I wasn't the provider, the fixer, the one who had to make the holiday plans work around everyone else's chaos. I was just Maisie, someone with a skill, a role, and no emotional expectations. The work days were long, but focused. I reviewed scripts, helped translate financial jargon into something digestible, and coached 2 interns on how to track creative contracts without getting screwed. One of them, a girl named Lena, reminded me of myself at 25. Eager to please, quiet when it mattered, unsure of when it was okay to say no. On our 4th day, the director asked if I'd be willing to record a short voiceover for one of the closing scenes. Just a few lines, no face on camera. She said, "You've been through it. You know what it feels like to be used and still be expected to smile. People will hear that in your voice." I almost said no. Then I thought about all the people who've been guilted into silence. The ones who carry entire families on their back and are still told they're not doing enough. I thought about myself. So I said yes. We recorded it in 1 take. When people treat you like a resource instead of a relationship, the most radical thing you can do is stop showing up. Not with anger, with absence, with standards, with no. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even personal. But it was honest. And when the episode aired 3 weeks later, I didn't promote it. I didn't link it. I didn't post. But somehow, it found its way into the hands of people who needed it. One morning I opened my email and saw messages from names I didn't recognize. Most were just thank yous. But one stood out. A woman named Talia wrote, "I watched the documentary and heard your voice. My brother used my credit to start a business that failed. When I asked for repayment, I was called selfish, dramatic, ungrateful. My parents told me to just let it go. I thought I was overreacting. But you made me feel sane again. You made me feel seen." I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I needed her praise, but because I realized I no longer needed an apology from Jonah. I didn't need Ivy to suffer, or the world to know what they did. What I needed was already unfolding in the quiet, private moments, when someone who felt like I once did finally decided to stop apologizing for having limits. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't broken, I was just done. And there's something incredibly powerful about being done for the right reasons. By the time I returned to Chicago, I was no longer the same person who had left it. The city looked the same, of course. Same lights, same skyline, same elevator chime at the office. But the way I moved through it had shifted. I no longer flinched when my phone buzzed. I no longer scanned social media waiting for the next vague jab from Ivy or Jonah. The volume in my head had gone quiet. My boundaries no longer felt like walls I had to defend. They felt like air I could finally breathe. That first Monday back, I walked into a pitch meeting for a new division the firm was testing. A branch dedicated to creative entrepreneurs who didn't fit the traditional client mold. Startups, artists, digital strategists. The kind of people I used to help in my free time because no one else took them seriously. Now I was proposing we build a team just for them with tailored consulting services and adaptive models. My voice didn't shake. My math was tight. My ideas landed. And for once the room listened without asking if someone else had reviewed my numbers. A week later, the board approved the pilot program and asked me to lead it. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate loudly. I just left the room, ordered a black coffee, and walked 3 blocks without checking my phone. Not because I was avoiding anyone, but because for the first time in a long time, no part of me wanted to explain my value to people who had spent years pretending they couldn't see it. Around the same time, I got a wedding invitation from a former client turned friend. She was marrying a musician she'd met while recording her debut EP. Small ceremony. No influencers. No theme color. She added a note. We're keeping it intimate. Only the ones who never asked for anything and gave everything. I RSVP'd yes without hesitation. It would be my first social event in months that didn't carry the weight of obligation or damage control. No expectations. No politics. Just joy, straight and simple. But life, of course, has a way of testing your resolve right when you've found your rhythm. 2 weeks before the wedding, my mother called. Her voice was cautious. Not cold, not warm. Careful. She said Jonah and Ivy are struggling. The shower vendors are threatening legal action. Apparently, a few even contacted Dad directly. They're saying you reversed the charges and never told anyone. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence fill the space she so often tried to decorate with excuses. When she realized I wasn't going to rescue her from the discomfort, she added, I know things got out of hand, but Maisie, they're having a baby. This stress is hurting the whole family. I said nothing for a long time. Then I answered in a voice so calm it startled even me. I told the truth. I protected myself. That's all I did. If that hurts the family, maybe the family should ask itself why. She didn't push further. I think she knew. The door she used to walk through had been closed. Not locked, but no longer automatic. You don't get to use someone, shame them for setting limits, and then ask for their comfort when your choices come back around. A few nights later, I posted a short blog entry to my private website. Just 400 words. A reflection on quiet boundaries titled, The Cost of Being Useful. It wasn't about them. It wasn't about me. It was about people like me. Those who grew up thinking generosity was a duty, not a choice. I didn't share it anywhere public. But it somehow made its way into the hands of a columnist at a niche finance publication. A week later, she quoted it in a piece titled, When Selflessness Turns Self-Destructive. The article went viral in small circles. People emailed. People forwarded. People thanked me for writing what they'd been afraid to say. That's how I knew I was back. Not by applause. Not by headlines. But by watching strangers find pieces of themselves in something I wrote without trying to be seen. I wasn't chasing resolution anymore. I wasn't watching my family implode. I was busy building something they could never touch again. I had returned. Not to them, but to myself. Quietly. Completely. And without knocking. The funny thing about walking away from chaos is that at first your silence feels like exile, but over time it starts to feel like peace. That's what I kept learning every day, as life filled back up with the kind of calm I hadn't realized I'd been missing. No more tiptoeing around someone else's emotional landmines. No more trying to word things carefully, so I wouldn't sound too harsh or ungrateful for being treated like a bank. Just space. Space to do my work. To sleep without checking my phone. To make dinner without an anxious thought creeping in. Space to feel like I belong to myself again. The new department at work had quietly grown faster than expected. We onboarded 4 clients in 2 months, all of them women in their 30s like me, all of them brilliant and burned out from being stretched too thin for too long. They weren't just looking for a financial advisor. They were looking for someone who understood what it meant to say yes too often and too early. I didn't preach to them. I just listened, clarified, and made their money work for them instead of everyone else. Each time I left a client meeting, I felt lighter. Not because I was fixing anyone, but because I wasn't betraying myself anymore by enabling people who refused to grow. Then one afternoon, a journalist from a lifestyle podcast reached out asking if I'd be open to doing a short interview. Nothing dramatic, just a conversation about navigating personal boundaries and financial independence. She said she'd read the quote from my blog, and it resonated with their whole team. I hesitated at first, but then I said yes, because this time it wouldn't be about what happened to me. It would be about what someone else might still be going through. We recorded it over coffee in a quiet booth, no studio lights, no makeup crew, just two women talking like it wasn't being recorded. At one point, she asked, "If you could say one sentence to the version of yourself who let that card get misused, what would it be?" I thought for a moment. Then, I said, "It's not unkind to stop being useful to people who only remember you when they're in need." After the episode aired, something shifted. People I hadn't spoken to in years began to reach out, not with pity, but with respect. An old college friend emailed me saying, "I never knew how much you carried." "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." One of my former clients, now a creative director at a major agency, offered to bring me on as a speaker for a women's empowerment series. Even my manager, who had always been professional but distant, pulled me aside one morning and said, "You've built something rare here. And you did it while everyone underestimated you. That's no small thing." But what mattered most wasn't the outside recognition. It was the fact that I didn't need it to feel solid. It was just confirmation of what I already knew, that walking away wasn't weakness. It was the first real act of self-respect I had ever performed without permission. Around that same time, I got a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo. A baby, Jonah's son, maybe a few weeks old. No note, just the photo. I looked at it for a long time, not with anger, but with clarity. This child didn't owe me anything. And I didn't owe his parents anything either. But I could still choose to be kind in a way that didn't cost me my boundaries. That night, I called my lawyer and finalized a decision I had quietly made months earlier. I established a trust. A separate education fund in the baby's name. Not through Jonah, not through Ivy. Just directly through legal structure. It would mature when the child turned 18. With or without acknowledgement. With or without forgiveness. A quiet gift that required no thank you, just like me. That was the day I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything to come full circle. I had closed the loop on my own, and in that quiet, in that stillness, I found something better than justice. I found freedom. A few months later, I found myself sitting at a quiet table by the window of a small cafe just off the lake, sipping tea and reviewing client notes before a team check-in. The light was soft, the kind of mid-morning calm you don't notice when your mind is cluttered with people you're trying to please. I looked out at the street and realized I hadn't thought about Jonah or Ivy in days. Not in bitterness, not in guilt, just, not at all. That was new. That was peace. Around that time, I began mentoring a young analyst named Bria, sharp, talented, and far too apologetic. She reminded me of a younger version of myself, the version that believed being irreplaceable meant being endlessly available. One afternoon, after a tough call, she looked at me and said, "How do you stay so calm when people treat you like you owe them something?" I paused, then answered honestly, "Because I've learned that being needed isn't the same as being respected, and I'd rather be respected." She nodded slowly, like she didn't quite believe it yet but wanted to. I recognized that look. I'd worn it for years. That evening walking home, I passed by the rooftop venue where Ivy's baby shower had taken place. I didn't plan it. I wasn't seeking it out. It was just there, quiet and lit up for a corporate mixer. For a moment I stopped and looked up at it. Not with anger, not with sadness, just with awareness. That place had once symbolized everything I wasn't invited to. Now it was just a rooftop. Just another building in a city I had reclaimed on my own terms. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not some grand confrontation, not some viral mic drop moment. Just walking past the scene of your deepest insult without needing the world to know what it meant. I kept walking. That weekend, I attended the wedding of my friend from the creative agency. It was small, intimate, filled with people who had nothing to prove and everything to give. During the reception, someone asked how I knew the bride. I smiled and said, "She was one of the first people who saw me outside the lens of what I do for others." They laughed and said, "That's rare." I nodded. "It is. But it's not impossible. You just have to stop performing for people who only clap when you shrink." A few weeks after the wedding, I received one last letter. Handwritten. From my mother. It wasn't long. Just a page and a half. She didn't apologize directly. She didn't explain the past. What she did say was this: I'm learning that love without respect is not love at all. I'm sorry it took losing access to finally understand who you are. I hope one day we can start again on better terms, your terms. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't reply. Not because I hadn't forgiven her, but because some things don't need to be spoken out loud to be real. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not permission. It's not an invitation to resume what broke you. It's the quiet decision to stop bleeding energy into places that never deserved your trust. These days, I don't call myself a survivor. That feels like I'm still carrying the past. I'm just someone who finally learned how to stop handing my worth to people who only know how to spend it. I still get questions sometimes. From people who heard fragments of the story, people who say things like, but it's family right, and I always answer the same way. Family is not a passcode. It's not a free license to cross boundaries and call it love. Family, like any relationship, requires reciprocity. Without that, it's not a bond, it's an arrangement. And I no longer do arrangements that cost me myself. So if you've ever been made to feel like your boundaries are the problem, if you've ever been told you're too sensitive or too cold just because you expect basic decency, hear this. You are not too much. You are not selfish. You are simply someone who finally decided to stop participating in your own depletion. And that is something worth standing up for. I built my life back quietly, brick by brick, alone but not lonely. And the funny thing is, I no longer want the people who once called me too rigid to see it, because I didn't build it for them. I built it so I'd never need their approval again. Not even a little. And if you're wondering how the story ends here, it doesn't. It just begins differently without them. So now I'll ask you, not as a moral, not as advice, but as a real question. What would your life look like if you stopped apologizing for taking up space you already earned?